Welcome everybody to my channel. This is Mon, and in this guide we will dive into how to build the new fast gunner weapon, Primal Rage, which has a special no reload mechanic. So, starting with its weapon features, 35% chance of gaining a stack of fast gunner effect on hit, which is a continuous buff granting 1% fire rate and 1% attack for 2 seconds, stacking up to 5 times by default. Then, when the magazine has 1 bullet left, 1% of max HP and spare ammo can be consumed to keep firing, and while doing so, HP cannot drop below 1. So this is the special mechanic of this weapon. It doesn't have to reload anymore, but at the cost of consuming your HP per bullet. Then, each hit restores HP equal to 0.1% times current fast gunner stacks, and so this feature is just so that you don't consume all your HP in 1 second, then die from getting tickled by any enemy. And lastly, every 1% change grants 1% weapon damage boost, stacking up to 80%, lasting for 5 seconds. Each stack duration is independent. So this is pretty much the weapon features buff, and now here this is obviously triggered by the own weapon's HP consumption, but it can also be triggered by an activator. So as long as you have the weapon equipped, and then you use an activator, the stacks will proc based on how much HP you've healed. Moving on to the calibration that you're going to want to run, it will be Assault Style. Assault Style calibration gives 20% attack bonus, which is a massive buff that can be permanently abused since this weapon doesn't need to reload. This means that its negative effect, being the magazine capacity minus 25%, doesn't negatively affect this weapon at all. Now the calibration does reduce your accuracy by 50 points, but that's just another unimportant debuff to this weapon. And then for the calibration substats, you're going to want to go with double crit rate since this is a crit weapon. Moving on to accessories, I'm running the accuracy and range setup. As you can see, I've got 83 accuracy and 88 range. The accuracy is used to diminish the loss of accuracy from the calibration, and the extra range is to suffer less from damage fall off. So this setup would be made up of the tactical suppressor, the tactical rifle scope, the tactical laser sight, and lastly the amended mag. This time we won't be using the legendary mag, since it gives magazine capacity, which is a useless stat for this weapon. We're also not going to use the purple mag, since, well, although it does give mobility, it gives a lot of reload speed, which is like useless on this gun. So this is why we are using the amended SMG mag for the increased accuracy. Now moving on to the Cradle options, the important Cradle to use are as follows. So you're going to want Marked Strike for the Weakspot damage bonus against targets marked with the bullseye. Then you're also going to want Fast Pursuit, so upon triggering Fast Gunner, gain one of the following effects at random: attack plus 3%, crit rate plus 3%, or crit damage plus 8% for 12 seconds. Up to 5 stacks, effect is removed after switching weapons. Then you're also going to want Anti-Phase for the SMG damage bonus, Tactical Combo for the weapon damage bonus after swapping your gun, and lastly, Steady Hand. So when you have a buff, e.g. Fortress Warfare, Fast Gunner, weapon damage plus 10%, and weak spot damage plus 25%. Now, if you have all of these cradles equipped, you're still left with 3 more options. However, I haven't played the lunar season or whatever yet, but going off of what the new cradles give, since this weapon reduces your HP, you might as well go with Deviant Energy Defense, and there's also going to be a mod that will synergize with this Cradle, so it's very important. So using this, you'll gain a shield equal to 30% of max HP. You also gain weapon damage reduction and status damage reduction with a cooldown of 30 seconds for this Cradle. Then you'd probably want Resilience, so that when your sanity is below 30%, damage received from Deviants is also reduced by 30%. And you'd also want to go with Chaotic Thoughts, so when you have a whim due to low insanity, damage reduction against Deviants plus 10%, and damage against Deviants plus 10%. Now, if you're still in an old server, like the Hard Manibus server or Way of Winter servers, that are not tagged with the lunar thing, you should run these cradles. Moving on to the secondary and melee options, starting with the secondary, you're going to want either the Bingo or the Wildfire. The Bingo can give up to 45% weak spot damage bonus and up to 15% attack. However, it has a small magazine capacity, so it's more suited in fights where you don't need to reload the Bingo and where the enemy has weak spots. If not, then you should use the wildfire for the 25% weapon damage bonus and for the bullseye mark spread. Then for the melee option, you're going to want to use the long axe for the fortress warfare effect, which will give you 20% weapon damage bonus and super armor. Moving on to the key gear, there are a lot of fast gunner key gear options, but ultimately it'll come down to the Osis mask and to the charmed mag top, which is the new key gear. We're not going to be using the other ones such as the dust mask, since the dust mask reloads bullets in your magazine, which is something we don't really care, nor do we want, and the precise shot mask gives you bonus reload speed, which is also useless. Now between the Osis mask, which is fast gunner max stacks plus 10 and attack plus 1% per stack, and the charmed mag top, which is, well, if we read the description, when the player is in fast gunner status, the less ammo or magazine capacity they have, the higher their chance of triggering an extra bullet when firing. At 1% ammo, the chance of triggering an extra bullet is 40%. So we can see that this was made synergistically with this weapon, with the Primal Rage, since the Primal Rage will never run out of bullets, pretty much. Since the Primal Rage never needs to reload and it'll always keep shooting, which is good for this key gear. But really the difference is that Osis Mask will trade some damage for more healing, so HP, whereas Charmed Mag Top will trade HP for more damage, and here's a demonstration of it. Of course, there are some minor mods differences between both, and it'll be explained in the mods section. Now, before I talk about the gear sets, if you've been enjoying this guide, make sure to like this video and to subscribe to my channel to not miss my future guides. And with that, we continue forward to the gear sets. So moving on to the gear sets, you will want to use 3-piece Lone Wolf with 2-piece Treacherous Tides. The 3-piece Lone Wolf, we really don't care about the magazine capacity bonus. That's like a very, very small, minor, well, inconvenience. And so pretty much we're going with Lone Wolf for the crit rate of 5% and for the stacking crit damage of 48%, which are both very important stats for this weapon. Now for the 2-piece Treacherous Tides, if you've read the description, you might ask yourself, why are we even running this? This gun will not allow us to stay above 70% HP, pretty much. And so if you've read the description, you'll know that it is that when HP is above 70%, weapon damage and status damage plus 12%, which is, if we just take it word for word, it is an upgrade over the Savior piece, which would be only 10%. However, the description is wrong. So it's actually when HP is below 70%. So let me show it to you right here. So now I have removed all of my gear sets and whatnot. I have removed all of my mods, and I also don't have any Cradle. So if we take a look at my stats, you'll see that I actually have 12% weapon damage bonus, 12% status damage bonus, and that my HP is below 70%. Which pretty much means that we will be running Treacherous Tides. Moving on to the food buffs, here you're going to want to eat mixed fried hot dog as the food slot, so used to increase damage by at least 20% towards enemies affected by the bullseye. Now, as a weaker alternative, you can always eat bone and deviated sausage, but the damage buff is only going to be effective against bosses by 15%. Now, there is also this new Lunar Oracle food buff, which would be the roulette dumplings, and so eating it will gain one of the following effects randomly. Eating it reduces sanity by 150, damage plus 15, damage plus 15 against bosses, for deviants, blah blah. And that during the Lunar Oracle, you gain all these effects at once. So during the Lunar Oracle, if you're like clearing POIs and whatnot, and that you're not going to mark enemies, then sure, you could eat this, but if you are, then always go with mixed fried hot dog. Then for the drink slot, there currently isn't any drink that will buff this gun's damage, so use either a movement drink buff such as the iced tea, or you could always go with Stardust Raspberry Shaved Ice to increase your continuous debuff effect durations by 20%, which would be the bullseye effect. Now, let's talk about the suffix and substat priority, starting with the gun and mask. So for the gun mod and mask mod, they can contain keyword suffix mods, here being fast gunner suffix, and you will preferably go with a fast gunner suffix, since, well, they just roll higher than your violent or precision suffixes. So for instance, this fast gunner suffix will give you 8% weapon damage bonus and say 20% crit damage, whereas Violent only gives 15 crit damage and 6% weapon damage. So go with a good fast gunner mod. So as linked attribute, preferably you'd have when in fast gunner state, crit damage plus 20%, and when in fast gunner state, Weakspot damage plus 12%, with a general attribute being, well, the main enemy that you're going to fight against. So if you're going to fight against a great one, you would want damage against great ones. Now, this is like the best case scenario. It's really rare to get a mod with these roles. So usually you're going to have like when in fast gunner state, weapon damage, and then crit damage, and then 2 damage bonuses versus X type of enemy. Having the rolls roll into the type of enemy, you want to have the damage bonus. Then, now, with this new update, we are introduced to something, a new suffix, which would be lunar suffix. And here, we would actually want to go with the lunar suffix for the helmet and for the top mod, since, well, only the helmet and the top mod can hold lunar suffixes. Now, the reason we go for these is that, well, they roll much, much higher than your, well, violent suffixes. Although here, as general substat, it doesn't say that it'll roll X-type damage bonus, but it does. And so, for instance, the lower your HP, the higher your crit damage, up to 30%, which is massive. The lower your HP, the higher your weapon damage bonus, up to 12%, which is a lot once again. And so here is an example of a mod, and here are the rough estimations of the lunar buffs from a mod with a green crit substat. So essentially, if you use Charm Mag Top without any mods that allow you to gain extra fast gunner stacks, you're pretty much going to permanently benefit from the max percentage of the buff. However, if you max out the amount of possible fast gunner stacks, I'm not going to show it on screen, but the max possible fast gunner stacks would be 20. And with that, you'll stay at around 60% HP, which means you'd still benefit from like 7.2% to 8.4% crit damage from this mod, which is still really good. So yeah, if the substat roll is a gold roll, then you'd benefit from 30% crit damage, which is huge. Although you'd have to be low HP, of course. But even if you're not, there's a lot of thresholds, so it's really like friendly to use that mod. So just go with a lunar suffix as long as it rolls good substats. Then, moving on to everything else, so the pants, boots, and gloves, you will want to go with a violent suffix with weapon damage as linked attribute, and with 2 damage bonuses versus X type of enemy as general attributes. Now, with that out of the way, let's start talking about the mods. So starting with the gun mod, the ideal mod to go with would be Precision Rush. You get a massive amount of weak spot damage bonus, 45%, which is really good, and it stacks after 3 seconds, so 15% per second, which is nice. So if I can show it to you right here, I currently have nothing on, only the mod and no Cradle. So if I just trigger Fast Gunner, you'll see that out of the first second, I already have 70%, which is 55 from the gun's base weak spot damage bonus, plus 15. And so if I just trigger it for a bit longer, you'll see that I'm at 70, and then I'm at 85. So it's per second, it'll grow by 15% each second up to a maximum of 45%. However, this mod would only be good against enemies with weak spots, and if you do hit them consistently. So if you don't, I would recommend Shootout. When triggering Fast Gunner, weapon damage plus 1.5% for 10 seconds, up to 20 stacks, which means this will hit the ceiling at 30%. Now, this effect on average will be procced after, say, 4 seconds, so it's still good. It's just going to take 1 more second than Precision Rush. Now, if you really don't have a good mod, so not a good Precision Rush nor a good Shootout, then feel free to run Shooting Blitz, which is going to be a weaker alternative than the others, since although it doesn't need to be stacked, it maxes out at only 15%, and the fast gunner duration is kind of wasted on this gun, since, well, this gun doesn't need to reload as such. Then lastly, with Cowboy Rush, we're not going to run it. The literal first few words say after reloading an empty magazine, which is impossible for this gun to do unless if you run out of bullets. Then, moving on to the Bullseye Weapons mod, it's going to be Vulnerability Amplifier for the extra 8% vulnerability. Now, moving on to the Helmet mod, you have 3 options. You've got Momentum Up, you have Faithful Strike, and you also have Precise Strike. Now, Faithful Strike will be the best option when the enemy doesn't have any weak spots. So if you don't hit weak spots, or if the enemy just straight up doesn't. Then if the enemy does have weak spots, and assuming you have a higher weak spot hit rate, then the choice between a precise strike and momentum up would come down to your own weak spot to weapon damage ratio and how good their substats are. But then if you don't have a very high weak spot hit ratio, then you should just use momentum up. Moving on to the mask mod, the two options you will have to choose between would be Blitzkrieg, and the other one would be Explosive Barrage. Now, they're both good options, but because of the lunar suffix giving you more buffs the less HP you have, and of another mod that does the same thing, Explosive Barrage will have an edge for damage. As seen in the clip where I demonstrated Charm Mag Top versus Osus Mask, if you use Charm Mag Top with, Explosive Barrage, you will sit at pretty much 1 HP. So if anything tickles you, you die. So it's a riskier mod to use, but you get way more damage. So use it at your own risk. Hence, pretty much if you want more damage at a higher risk of dying, go with Explosive Barrage. If you want less damage, but lower risks of dying, then you should pick Blitzkrieg. Moving on to the gloves mod, you have two options here. You have Crit Amplifier and Crit Boost. Now, due to the simple fact of not having a lot of crit rate compared to crit damage, we will prioritize Crit Boost. But as always, you might currently not have a good crit boost, but have a very good crit amplifier for the type of enemy you want to fight against. So don't feel bad to switch off Crit Boost to Crit Amp. Now moving on to the boots mod, you have two options. You have Rush Hour and Covered Advance. Now, as usual, Covered Advance is still a very good option since it's not very conditional and gives good buffs. The damage dealt to you from your own weapon's HP damage, so the HP reduction here, will not affect the condition for Covered Advance. Which means, if I just show it here, my Covered Advance is about to run out. I'm just going to start shooting. You'll see that I'm depleting my HP, but Covered Advance is still coming back up. So this simply means that the Primal Rage's HP depletion does not affect Covered Advance's synergy. Now, if you wish to push DPS even further, this is the mod that I'm talking about, Rush Hour. So every 10% HP loss will give you 4% weapon damage bonus. With the ceiling being, affected by your own HP, so it can only give up to 36%, because if you wish to have 40%, that would mean that you're dead. Now, to benefit this much from the mod, you will want to be low, and that's where you use stuff like Charm Mag Top with Explosive Barrage Mask mod. And you'll probably need some form of survivability, which is why for the top mod, we're going to go with a gold defensive mod, such as Ardent Shield or something like Critical Rescue. Now, if you have a keen eye, you would have noticed that I'm running crit damage enhancement, but that's simply because I just don't have a leveled up gold mod. So pretty much run the shield mods or just damage reduction mods. They are good with this setup. And here also, if we don't go for a gold mod, we'll also not be able to have lunar suffix on the mod, which is another reason. Now, I do want to discuss Ardent Shield really quickly because it's a new mod, and with a new mod, you can expect horrendous translation. So if you just read it right here, while the shield is active, you gain 15% damage reduction. When the shield exceeds 1000, single instances of damage will not penetrate the shield. Now, this might be a bit confusing, but pretty much it just means when any shield is active, you will gain 15% damage reduction, and then when that shield has a value of over 1000, it says single instances of damage will not penetrate the shield. Really what it means is that if an attack one-shots the shield, its damage will not overflow to your HP, as seen in this clip. So this mod will be good against the explosive blobs, or whatever the hell they're called. Lastly, for the pants mod, you have two options. You've got Deadshot, and you also have Bullet Siphon. Now, starting with Deadshot, it's the one you should go with since it's really quickly to stack it up and gives up to a massive buff of 45% crit damage. However, if you don't have a good one, then feel free to also use Bullet Siphon, since although it only gives up to 25% weapon damage bonus, so 5% by default, and every 5 bullets consumed in the magazine grants 4% weapon damage, capped at 20%. It doesn't need to be stacked. So here, I have one bullet in my SMG. I'm just, I shoot, I run around, and then if I take a look at my stats, you'll see that I'm sitting at 26.8% weapon damage bonus. I had a stack of things, so if I just reset it here, I'm actually sitting at 25.8%. So here, this is the 5% by default plus 16% because my actual mag is 25, so I'm actually not going to hit the cap here. So 16 plus 5 plus the substat here, which would be 4.8, would give me 25.8%. So pretty much this mod doesn't need to be stacked, but just make sure that your max bullet count in your magazine would be 26 so that you can at least max out the core effect of the mod. But of course, that is if you end up running this mod, because if you do run Deadshot, there is zero need. Now for the Weakspot build, pretty much everything I've talked about in the crit build section will remain the same, but with the exceptions I will go over now. So starting with the calibration, instead of double crit rate as calibration substats, you're going to want double weak spot damage bonus. Then as gear sets, you will replace the 3-piece Lone Wolf for a 3-piece Renegade for the weak spot damage bonus. So for the 10% weak spot damage bonus from the 2-piece and for the up to 40% weak spot damage bonus from the 3-piece effect. Then moving on to the substats priority, let's start with the gun and mask. So for the gun and mask with the fast gunner suffix, we're still going to use that. However, instead of going for crit damage as linked attribute, we're going to go for weak spot damage bonus. And then for the helmet and for the top mod, we won't be going lunar suffix anymore because lunar gives crit damage. So we're actually going to go with precision for the top, well, just for everything actually, top, helmet, pants, and all the other stuff. Then lastly, for the mods, starting with the helmet, well, first of all, Fateful Strike won't be an option anymore since it's a crit mod. Then that goes the same for the mask mod as well. Mask mod, we won't be using, if I can find it, Explosive Barrage, since Explosive Barrage gives you crit rate. Then moving on to the gloves, instead of using the 2 crit mods, we're going to be choosing between Munitions Amplifier and Weak Spot Damage Boost. Depending on which stat you need the most, you'll pick the one that you have less. Then lastly, for pants mod, we cannot take Deadshot anymore since we won't have any crit rate, so we're going to have to use Bullet Siphon. So this concludes this guide. If you've made it this far, let me know which weapon you'd like to see next, and I'll see you in my next guide.